Good morning and welcome to worship at First Unitarian Church of Rochester, New York. I invite you now to join me in singing our opening hymn, One More Step. One more step, we will take one more step, till there is peace for us, and everyone will take one more step. One more word, we will say one more word, till every word is heard by everyone. Will say one more word. One more prayer, we will say one more prayer, till every prayer is shared by everyone. Will say one more prayer. One more song, we will sing one more song, till every song is sung by everyone. Will sing one more song.
Welcome to worship at First Unitarian Church of Rochester. It is so good to be with you this morning. Last week, we joined Unitarian Universalists from around the world, worshiping together at our General Assembly. If you joined us either here in this Zoom room or live streaming from Facebook or from the Unitarian Universalist Association's website, you know that hundreds of thousands of us worship together. And it was great to be together. But this morning, this week, I am so glad to be with all of you, to be with those of you joining us from across Rochester and Monroe County and Ontario County, and as far away as the West Coast, as well as in China. It is so good to be with all of you. I'm the Reverend Sherry Halliday Kwan, the lead minister of this church, and joining me today in leading worship is Tom Snell, our music director, who you just saw help us get into our bodies and settle into worship. Arson is on piano, and we've got folks behind the scenes making sure that we're all able to enter into our worship space and join in when there's a chance for us to all connect with each other in the chat. I invite each of you to now breathe with me. Let's settle into our places. And if you have a chalice handy or a candle, light yours as we join in unison words to open our worship. May the flame we now kindle inspire us to use our power to heal with love, to help with compassion, to bless with joy, and to seek liberation in the fullness of community.
Backyard bonfires have always been a big part of my family culture. Growing up, the highlight of the summer would be going down to my grandparents' house in the country and setting a giant brush pile on fire. My whole extended family would gather and we would roast marshmallows and hot dogs and just have a really great time together. And I still enjoy a backyard fire, albeit on a much smaller scale in a fire pit. Now my partner and I have had some lively conversations about optimum ways to get a fire started. He prefers stacking the logs in a teepee method, and I swear by the log cabin method. But when I was visiting my parents last summer, I experienced a whole new way to get a bonfire started. Yes, that is a flamethrower, and I think that's why we come to church. Because here at First Unitarian, we celebrate that there are many valid ways of accomplishing our goals. And here we learn from one another, from lived experience and tradition, from new scientific revelation and technology, different, sometimes better, sometimes bizarre, ways of living our lives. Now, we've been doing church a little differently for the past few months, and we'll continue to do so. And think that you've likely also learned to do some things differently yourselves. So the chat box is now open. I invite you to share with us something you've learned to do differently these past few months.
One of the things that we've all learned to do differently together is church. We've learned to be the church in a way that doesn't involve us, generally speaking, going into the building. We have always known, but in the past few months, it's become increasingly clear that the church is not the building, but the people. And the building gives us a place to house our coming together, but now we do this online. It's up to us right now to live into truly being the church. And so our summer theme is Be the Church. Brick by brick, we're laying something on top of that foundation of common values that we bring. And we're learning to build up what it means to be together, to celebrate what we're already doing, and strengthen places, build new rooms, and invite others in. So this summer, we invite all members and friends of First Unitarian to explore our summer theme, to be the church by identifying and committing to finding a way to listen, open, and serve inside the church community, and to find a way to do that outside the church in the wider world. So each week over the summer, you'll hear from someone in our church community who will tell you about a way to get involved as an individual or a family or with your Soul Matters group or with friends from church or friends from outside. This week, we invite you to take up the act of public witness as a member of this church. You've probably noticed that each Saturday and on many other days in between Saturdays, our city has continued to be the location of protests as part of the movement for Black lives. You may have also heard that in recent weeks, signs declaring that Black lives matter, as well as other public faces or facets, have been defaced. Signs in Brighton had "All Lives Matter" spray painted over them, and a repudiation of the declaration that Black Lives Matter. Perhaps just kids, as law enforcement seem to suggest, or perhaps the sign that there is a movement brewing in our nation, in our neighborhoods, that wishes to challenge, wishes to force underground these declarations. You may have also seen in Fairport this past week in Parrington, buildings defaced with swastikas. Again, perhaps just kids, but again, something intended to force underground, to make afraid those who proclaim something as simple as Black Lives Matter, something as simple as this multiracial, multicultural dream of a future community is worth pursuing boldly, worth pursuing plainly, worth pursuing publicly. Signs on lawns and bumper stickers and continual presence can sometimes feel as if it's ineffectual when creating large structural change. What can one sign on your front lawn do after all? We sometimes ask ourselves. But in the face of and in response to public defacing, the mainstreaming of these declarations that Black Lives Matter, an ongoing, persistent, bold, and normal presence of this declaration becomes deeply important. As much as our church claims a heritage of a radical witness, the ability to be present in social justice movements before they become normalized, before they become everyday kitchen table conversation, as much as our church claims that history, churches are of the mainstream. Churches hold a place in society that when making proclamations and declarations, those of us who gather together are able to proclaim a witness that allows other people to know that it's safe here to do so, that it's possible to do so. And so I invite all of you, if you don't yet have a practice of proclaiming that Black Lives Matter publicly, if you don't yet have a practice of demonstrating your support, you certainly understand the arguments around it, you certainly support the protests, you certainly understand the claims that are being made, but you've not yet declared public affirmation of these claims, I invite you this week to be the church by taking this act of public witness. Now you'll have lots of opportunities to do so. For those of you whose health concerns and mobility access allows them to show up in person, there's an event happening this afternoon in Brighton, crossing over that disparity line between Barrington and the city of Rochester. A protest and a march starting in Cobbs Hill Park will happen at 1 p.m. today. For those looking for a sign, there are people in our church community as well as the broader community who can help you out. Annie McQuilkin is helping with Project Air based out of Fairport, and Audrey Sal, a resident of Brighton, is producing and printing gorgeous signs that proclaim that Black Lives Matter, plainly and boldly. And we have many of them on hand. You can email Hannah at Hannah@Rochester Unitarian, and she'll let you know how to pick one up at the church when they're available later this week. I invite you this week to be the church, publicly, plainly, and boldly.
Please join me now in singing our next hymn, Where is Our Holy Church?
Truth and right. Where is our
We begin our time of prayer and meditation with a poem from the writer and poet who I once unilaterally declared the poet laureate of the pandemic. Lynn Unger writes in her poem, Food Chain, "Give up pretending. Everything you know, everything, sooner or later gets eaten. Little fish, big fish, no difference. The world's mouth is on you. Outside the personal, it even has a certain glory. When the mouse, in its last short dash to the grain, feels the great rush of wings, in the flash before the crushing beak descends, it is finally, luminously airborne. In the broad, voiceless hours of the night, you have always known the red beak of your consummation awaits you. The choice, very simply, is this. What will you give your own beloved bones and blood to feed? The red beak of our consummation awaits us. Please join me in the spirit of prayer. Spirit of life and love, source of beginnings and endings, we lift up our hearts to moments of glory that hold deep irony. We lift up our hearts to celebration and joy, a chance to be outside and break free, and the deep knowledge that so much bubbles below the surface. We celebrate those who bring successes and joys, achievements, firsts and lasts to this week. We hold to the sorrows, the worries, the fears. We hold the drudgery of the long march to freedom. We hold a steadfastness that comes with simply being stubborn enough to know that another world is possible. Spirit of life and love, we pray for the wisdom and courage to govern well, to know leaders who have the collective interest of all at heart, and to know that despite it all, each and every one of us is glorious. May it be so. Amen, and blessed be. I invite you into a time of silence, held collectively with all those around you, those who are just inches from you on the couch, those connected here in this Zoom space. May the silence we hold continue to hold us, heal us, and lift us up. Amen.
ourselves and each other, we begin again in love.
For remaining silent when a single voice would have made a difference.
We forgive ourselves and each other, we begin again in love.
For each time that our fears have made us rigid and inaccessible.
We forgive ourselves and each other, we begin again in love.
For each time we have struck out in anger without just cause.
We forgive ourselves and each other, we begin again in love.
For each time that our greed has blinded us to the needs of others.
We forgive ourselves and each other, we begin again in love.
For the selfishness that set us apart and alone.
We forgive ourselves and each other, we begin again in love.
For falling short of the admonitions of the Spirit.
We forgive ourselves and each other, we begin again in love.
For losing sight of our unity.
We forgive ourselves and each other, we begin again in love.
For those and for so many acts, both evident and subtle, which have fueled the illusion of separateness.
We forgive ourselves and each other, we begin again in love.
168 years to the day, Frederick Douglass gave a speech in Rochester, just 4 miles from our church building, perhaps a little further down the road from where you are now, or closer still for some of us. Douglass gave a speech that's come to be known as "What to the Slave is the 4th of July." It's one of his more famous speeches, and we claim the honor of being the site where it was delivered. I'm not certain there's much honor to claim in it for the American public. He begins with a bold claim. He addresses the white audience assembled as fellow citizens at a time when many gathered. Women, and certainly he as a Black man, were disenfranchised, unable to vote, when at a time many of them did not lay claim to the rights and responsibilities of citizenship. Douglass begins by naming plainly this expectation of shared humanity. Fellow citizens, he writes and says, "I am not wanting in respect for the fathers of this republic." I summarize, The point from which I am compelled to view them is not certainly the most favorable, but I cannot contemplate their great deeds with less than admiration. I unite with you to honor their memory. But he asks, why for this celebration of Independence Day? Why for this celebration of independence for some people day was he asked to speak? He goes on, are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? Us being Black Americans? Am I therefore called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence? Would to God, both for your sakes and ours, that an affirmative answer be truthfully returned to these questions. My task would then be light, my burden easy and delightful. But such is not the case. I say it with a sad sense of disparity between us. I am not included within the pale of glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, but not by me. The sunlight that brought light and healing brought stripes and death. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, but I must mourn. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. He goes on to say that he knows that some in the audience will ask, please make a rational argument. Run through the reasons for us. He goes on to say that churches, American religion, has long stood by to defend the institution of slavery and to call for civil conversation in this rational argumentation. He responds, I submit, where all is plain, there is nothing to be argued. What would you have me argue? On what branch of the subject of anti-slavery do the people of this country need light? Would you have me argue that man is entitled to liberty? That he's the rightful owner of his own body? Must I argue the wrongfulness of our reality? Is that a question? Is it to be settled by the rules of logic? To do so would be to make myself ridiculous. It would offer an insult to your understanding. There is not a man beneath the canopy of heaven that does not know that slavery is wrong for him. Must I argue that this system, thus marked with blood and stained with pollution, is wrong? No, I will not. I have better employment for my time and my strength. What then is to be argued? Is it that slavery is not divine? That God did not establish it? That our doctors of divinity are mistaken? There is blasphemy in the thought. That which is inhuman cannot be divine. The time for such argument has passed. At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument, is needed. For it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? One wonders about this speech in the context of a 4th of July that looks different than many others. A 4th of July that was tempered for many of us. A 4th of July that did not include public, city-sponsored fireworks celebrations and large cookouts. But a 4th of July that no less was marked by the disparities that exist in our wider Rochester community. A 4th of July that could be interpreted as a break from all that the world holds. A time to set aside the world's worries and concerns, to enjoy the luxury and isolation that pandemic tempts many of us into, or instead a call to greater freedom, a call to the expansion of liberties that the 4th of July theoretically promises to uphold. The 4th of July is rooted in the Declaration of Independence that many of us have come to know as a document full of great irony. A document penned by Thomas Jefferson, a slave owner who had the audacity to talk about, just as Douglass did, trapped in the confines of gender norms at the time, the audacity to talk about the equality of men right in the first line as he held slaves. This week I learned something, though. I learned that just as I, like Douglass, hold firm my commitment to celebrate the achievements of our founding fathers and broader ancestors, the complicated emotions that I have connecting me to this Declaration of Independence for some people cannot be laid purely at the feet of Jefferson. Jefferson, this man who we often claim as a Unitarian, but who made no such proclamations of his own religious yearnings, but who claimed on his own tombstone to be the author of the Declaration of Independence, may have been making too bold a case. Harvard professor and the director of the Sackler Center for Ethics, Danielle Allen, she claims that Jefferson was no more than the scribe, a collaborator certainly, but not the intellectual driver behind this document, this memorandum of understanding between disaffected colonies to declare common purpose. The intellectual engine behind this document, this declaration, was shared by Benjamin Franklin and John Adams, an actual Unitarian, flawed certainly, someone who believed that power, that is the right to democratic vote and the exercise of protecting rights of humanity, should be held by white men, despite his wife Abigail's objections. Adams believed, even at this time, in a sense of freedom, a sense of independence that could not include slavery, could not include the enslavement of fellow humans. Franklin, who had once owned slaves here in the American colonies, but who had a change of heart and later repudiated slavery, felt similarly at the time they joined together to pen this declaration. Allen, the political theorist and ethicist, claims that this sensibility of expanding freedom is built in fundamentally to the Declaration. For those of us who are gathered here, even those of us here in this community who are the descendants of African peoples enslaved in the Americas, even for those of us who are Black or Indigenous, even for those of us who are other people of color. This idea of expanding our sense of freedom and the quest for independence from our own ring to that which extends just beyond us is a call that you'll hear again and again as we gather together. The ability to move from our own lived experience to that of our fellow humans is fundamental to our shared religious life. As Unitarian Universalists, it is no secret that one of my goals, my primary mission as your spiritual leader, is to so ground us so deeply in our faith values that we cannot yet help but be led to a life that proclaims those values and virtues publicly. That having been disciplined to a faithful life where our behavior and actions are as often as possible aligned with the world that we wish to create, that we are called joyfully and answer the invitation to the world of liberation and celebration that includes all. It is no secret, at least now it is not, that my explicit goal is to expand our sphere of concern to that of another's, so that we truly believe and act as if, until all of us are free, none of us are free. Chances are, if you're worshiping with us now, you're not incarcerated or detained. Chances are, if you're worshiping with us now on Sunday morning, or even if you're able to watch this later on YouTube or listening to it as a podcast, there's access to some time that you get to choose how to use. There's access to the ability to make choices about how we live. This is no small privilege. And chances are, if you're worshiping with us right now, you have access to this privilege. This moment in history in which we are both asked to behave in ways that protect the health of ourselves and others, this moment in which we are asked to take up the mantle of expanding collective liberation, this moment asks us to expand our imaginations to include others in our realm of moral concern. We take our ring, and inevitably, I ask you almost every week to jump to a wider one, to expand and to get bigger. It is a strange time though. 10 weeks ago, I woke up at 5 a.m. to watch the live stream of the Battle of Lexington, which later became the Battle of Lexington and Concord, later that morning, that is. This is the battle that jump-started the American Revolution, the Civil War that here in these colonies declared independence from British rule. 10 weeks ago, I woke up at 5 a.m. to experience this battle reenactment because I married into a family where this happened in their hometown, happened on the church lawn in front of a Unitarian Universalist congregation. And this is an event, a historical reenactment that people travel from all over to witness. But despite this now becoming a part of my family local history, I had never seen it. And so I woke up a few hours before normal to watch it live, because this year it would be live streamed. This year, I could watch it on Zoom, just like you're coming to church on Zoom. Don't these times afford us amazing and unusual opportunities. It was only after I had made my cup of coffee and settled in, much to the grumbles of those in my household who had been dragged into this exercise, that I recalled that, of course, a reenactment in which people standing shoulder to shoulder to reenact war, and people standing shoulder to shoulder and sitting in close quarters would not be possible in this time of social distancing. It was only after I had made my cup of coffee and settled in resolutely to watch this battle reenactment that I realized I would be watching a video of 2019 and that I could have watched it at 7 a.m. or noon or 7 p.m. But I was up already, and so I watched it. I watched these grown men play dress up and replay war. I expected to find it, quite frankly, a little bit silly. These itchy wool costumes and old guns. I didn't anticipate how small the group would be. I didn't anticipate how much my expectations of a little silly would be far exceeded by how tremendously silly it would seem to be in a group of no more than a couple dozen. As the encroaching army of hundreds and then thousands descended. I didn't realize how silly it would look to be one of these patriots, viewed cautiously and supportively from those gathered on the outskirts, joined by those bearing witness from rooftops, but not down in the fray, joining what seemed to be a hopeless battle. I didn't realize how silly they would look, this small band of protesters. But here though is one of the founding stories of the United States of America. I didn't realize too how on top of that silliness, how emotionally charged this reenactment, this video that I could have watched at any time of day, but instead was watching in the wee hours of the morning, would make me feel. I didn't know that to see this small, foolish band with demands that couldn't possibly be met, with demands that felt like they were asking too much, with demands that felt driven by a sense of fury and anger and rage at the mistreatment of authorities, more than any sort of well-reasoned argumentation. I didn't realize how much this small band, driven by a sense and clear commitment only to the ways in which their humanity and political rights needed to be upheld, would make me wonder about my own participation in protests, would make me need to examine not only what I looked like, but what drove me to take part in public witness, what drove me to extend beyond cool and calm and rational argument when the political rights and common humanity of those outside of my most narrow ring of moral concern were at stake. Here in spiritual community, that explicit goal that I have for you, in which the faithful discipline that we cultivate internally moves us to act outside, is joined by the inverse. For those of you whose recent activity in past weeks has involved public witness, or whose recent activity in past decades has involved political activism. Or participation in war, or participation in state violence, or participation in building up the institutions that both protect freedom for some and limit it for others. For each of us for whom external action has been a part of our lives, and for whom has it not, I ask us to move in the opposite direction. If our innermost values drive us to act externally, in this summer of public witness, in this summer of political activism, as we prepare to extend and protect democracy through you, the vote, I ask us to take that external action and turn it inwards, asking ourselves also, what does this say about who we are as people? How does this inform our spiritual lives? What action did I take today that tells me who I am? Where have I fallen short? Where have I lived out of my deepest values? I showed you before some rings of concern. And with gratitude to Parker Palmer, I want to talk a little bit about our outer and inner lives. Parker Palmer talks about the ego, talks about, am I making a difference in the world? Talks about, what does it look like when I do something that stands in relationship to the people around us. And he talks also of the inner life, the questions of spirit, of values, of relationship with the divine, of the ways in which we talk with God, the ways in which we find ourselves in nature, held by science, moving effortlessly and delightfully with the advances of science. He talks about these as two aspects of our lives that are irrevocably us, cannot be separated, and yet are difficult often to connect. We start life completely self-absorbed, knowing only our innermost needs and wants and desires, but soon either at school or for some of us at home, the external becomes dominant. The ways in which we relate to the people around us and worry about what they might think of us becomes our central story. At some point, seeking reconnection with our inner life, many of us circle, seeking wholeness, finding a way to connect. Many of us come into communal spiritual life. Perhaps you found your way here to church, finding a way to find that innermost way of being. And this allows us to connect our inner lives, finding also a wholeness with our external life. But the ways in which the two are connected remain still challenging. The connection between what we do externally in the world and what happens inside is no more clear. Palmer offers another shape to this ring. He offers a Mobius strip, a simple yet strange little shape. By merely inverting with a little bit of intention, he suggests that to be whole involves some internal twisting. a looking back that allows us to connect our outside as we move around. It becomes our inside. And our inner life, as I mentioned before, drives us to external action. External action then invites us deeper into our inner lives. Palmer uses the Mobius Strip to demonstrate a number of ways in which our relationships with others might then inform our spiritual wholeness. But now in this moment, in this historic moment of external action, where the ways in which we are called to participate faithfully in public life, both through the movement for Black lives and extending democratic protections through UU the vote, we ask that these movements bring us inwards. The questions that arise from our lives have looked like a number of things for us collectively in this past year. I've sat with our Social Justice Executive Committee as we thought about the ways in which the work that we are called to do outside shifts how we are together as a team. How, in envisioning our deepest, most promising relationships with the external community, are we called to be as we sit around a table together? With the immigration ministry, we've wrestled with the questions of privilege and right, and whose voice matters most. We've gotten to sit with the reality that if we are always morally sure, we are perhaps not embedded deeply enough in the justice struggles of the present moment. It is with some honor and pride that I get to work with groups here in this church as we wrestle with the moral and ethical questions that then inform our own interior spiritual lives. So I ask each of us to take a ride this summer as we learn to be the church. We learn to be the church externally, bearing public witness in a way that proclaims that the First Unitarian Church of Rochester is a church for and with the city and the people. But also to look inside, to build brick by brick, to build on the foundations of who we are as a community and as individuals, knowing that along the way, there will be shifts. The rooms will change with time. Our hearts will be remodeled. And together, we get ever more free. May it be so. Amen. Today's offering continues the spirit of generosity and shared collective liberation in which we split our plate. We take up a collection financially that we split with an organization each week that is carrying on something that aligns with the mission of this church. Here at First Unitarian Church of Rochester, we listen deeply to others and ourselves. We open to wonder and transformation, and we serve together with love and humility. In this spirit, today's collection will be split with St. Joseph Neighborhood Center. Located on South Avenue, St. Joe's is rooted in the caring tradition of the Sisters of St. Joe, and it provides comprehensive physical and mental health services. It does so for people who lack insurance, people who are underinsured or uninsured entirely, people in and around Rochester in need know that they can go to St. Joe's and get the help that they need. Our offering today is collected by mail check through our app, our website, or by Venmo. Our offering is now humbly given and gratefully received.
Please join me in singing our next hymn, How Can I Keep From Singing?
My life flows on in endless song, above earth's lamentation. I hear the real, though far off hymn, that is a new creation. Through all the tumult and the strife, I hear the music ringing. It sounds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing? What though the tempest round me roars? I know the truth it liveth. What though the darkness round me close? Songs in the night it giveth. No storm can shake my inmost calm, while to that rock I'm clinging. Since love prevails in heaven and earth, how can I keep from singing?
Please join me in our unison words for extinguishing our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Love prevails from heaven and earth, friends. Inwards towards outwards, outwards towards inwards. May we move from, grow in, and speak with love. Go in peace, go in love. May it be so. I love you. Amen.